the not-too-distant future. The Minister has asked today for time, and he has told us that he is committed, and I think many of us believe he is committed to moving forward on this issue. But that time is not indefinite. So to be very clear, as I understand it, the Minister has spoken with my colleague, Senator Black, who is leading on this bill, and has stressed that he wishes for some more time to pursue his diplomatic approach and to examine these issues more closely. And he has given a commitment in writing that if the debate is adjourned today, the government will facilitate time for this debate to be resumed before the summer recess in July. So just to be very clear, we're not just having the debate and isn't it nice to have the debate. This debate will be resuming and there will be an opportunity to vote. There will be an opportunity to vote very clearly for what are concrete and, I believe, reasonable proposals. So just to be clear on that, and I'll talk about why this is a good bill with reasonable and good proposals, and why I don't believe actually the concerns, we are giving space for people to examine this, but I believe when they do examine it, they'll see the concerns don't stand up. In terms of that question of space and time as well, let's also be clear. It is not a neutral or in-between position to be where we are now. As was made clear in the letter from many Israeli citizens that we saw in the paper today, we are effectively enabling and economically sustaining settlements while we continue to trade with them. So that's not a neutral position, that's a position of support for things which we should not be supporting. And also, we have to be very clear on this. It is not just the Palestinians who are losing ground. The international community is losing ground. We are losing ground in East Jerusalem. In this very month, an order was made for 1,000 new settlement homes. In January this year, that order. We are losing ground in terms of diplomatic credibility, in terms of the space for dealing with this as we should through international law and through showing that we take it seriously. So it is not going to be simply a matter of relationship building and chatting to people in the room. To be serious and to be brave diplomatically means to show that you take things seriously. So I would urge the Minister, if he wishes, when he comes back in July to talk to this House again and to see this bill voted upon, if he wishes to show progress, it will not come by waiting for a magical consensus to arrive. It will only come through leadership. And Ireland has given service to its European colleagues by showing leadership in this, by showing leadership on recognition of PLO, by showing recognition, in fairness to the Taoiseach. He was one of the first who led out in condemning the proposal to locate the embassy in East Jerusalem. And let's remind ourselves that in the programme for government, there is a commitment to the recognition of the State of Palestine. That's also on the card, and that's also overdue. So just to be very clear, we cannot wait for consensus or joining in. If he wants to be in a different position in July, if he wants to show us progress, it's going to take leadership from Ireland, not simply conversation. To move to the bill, which I believe will be back, is a strong bill and I hope will be passed in July. Others have said it's not a boycott bill. It's not a boycott bill. Nonetheless, boycott is an effective and legitimate form of individual or collective protest in unjust situations, one that we invented in Ireland. However, this bill is not a boycott bill at all. This bill relates only to those goods produced in land which is illegally occupied, land which is not Israeli land. And I want to move in that. I had lengthy, because I don't want to take too much time, I want to move to a particular set of concerns. And others, I think, have addressed the international law that we stand behind us, the international concerns, but an area of great interest to myself, as others in the House will know, which is the area of trade. In terms of trade and recognition of international trade law, this bill does not impact on or in any ways breach international trade law. In terms of the World Trade Organization, we have senior opinions, as I said, from Michael Lynn, Professor James Corford and other senior counsels to say that, and note that the GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs articles, which talk about the exclusion of goods from particular areas, are explicitly clear that the provisions they have given, which have been incorporated into WTO rules, only apply to recognised territory. So if you have occupied territory that is not internationally recognised, it's not subject to those protections and from a state taking an action. Moreover, the EU trade deal with Israel, the EU Free Trade Agreement, explicitly excludes goods from settlements. They are not part of this arrangement. So it's very clear the EU itself has said we do not have a free trade agreement which encompasses goods from occupied territories. They are excluded, and indeed there is precedent from other trade deals and other free trade agreements which have also excluded other occupied territories from the provision of the free trade agreement. Moreover, Article 36 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the EU is very clear that there are exceptions to collective rules of trade where they can be justified on grounds of public morality, public policy and public security, and the protection of health and life of humans. It's not, with great respect to my colleague, Senator O'Reilly, this isn't a breach. It is a very clear exception. There's a procedure for activating this exception. In Germany, for example, they have used this exception in the past. It's been used by many other countries. It is standard practice. And I don't believe there is anybody in this House who would not say that the actions taking place in occupied territories do not breach public morality, public policy, or the protection of health and life of humans. So I would be extremely confident in terms of international trade law, European trade law and WTO rules, that we do not have any concern in that regard. I would also note, and it's something very important, we won't have time to elaborate today, this bill does not simply relate to Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. It relates to occupied territories. And I realise that can be a wide definition. There's a question, where do we draw the line on what are occupied territories? We have taken the most conservative, the clearest, strongest line in terms of where we do it. We have indeed the International Court of Justice, which has a mandate from countries around the world to rule on international disputes and to ultimately define international law. And we have set that as the bar. And yes, it does affect the occupied territories in terms of Israel. But it's also worth noting that there are other areas, for example, Western Papua, which has been under control of Indonesia for a large number of years, and we know that many of the Pacific Island states have been discussing taking cases through the International Court of Justice procedures to ensure that Western Papua would also be recognised as an occupied state, under which rules it would again fall within the bounds of our bill. There are many other areas of occupation and control which we could discuss, and I'd like to just indicate that when this bill does come, as I hope it will come, to committee stage, we are, of course, willing to work with the government and all parties to ensure we have the best possible, clearest definition of occupied territory. So I look forward to this debate resuming, and I hope that we're looking at a very, very different landscape than we are today, because right now we are losing ground.
Thank you, Senator McDowell.